Hi guys, here's a little video I'm making to give you some ideas on how to incubate tempeh at home. I'm looking to encourage people to make tempeh at home because there's nothing better than fresh tempeh, and I've got another video on how to make tempeh, which is quite comprehensive and accompanies the tempeh kits that I'm currently sending to encourage people to make tempeh at home. But this video will focus quite briefly, but just focus on some ideas on how to incubate tempeh. Now, incubating tempeh is one of the problems that we have if we don't live in the tropics around the equator, such as in Indonesia, where it's quite easy to incubate tempeh most places in Indonesia because you just leave it outside and it consistently is about something 28 to 32 degrees Celsius, which is ideal tempeh incubating weather. But for those of us in the northern southern hemisphere, in the more temperate climates, it can be a bit of an issue. So how to do it when you're at home, just using general heat sources that you've got in your house. You don't need to get too technical. There are a lot of ideas around on the internet, but if you don't really want to get the tools out, there are simple ways that will hopefully help you make great tempeh as well. I've been making tempeh for about 7 years now, commercially, and I have a street food business in London where I make my tempeh a couple of days a week and cook it in fresh dishes. As I'm sending out kits, I've been looking into ways just using things that I've got around the house, and it's all come out quite well. I've been running a few experiments and I'd like to share some of the ideas I've got with you guys. But first things first, what environment is best for incubating tempeh? Ideally, you want to be in an environment of about 30 degrees Celsius. You can go really anywhere from 26 degrees Celsius to about 32. For the kits that I'm providing, the starter culture I'm using, you're going to look at around 32 to 36 hours of fermentation at about 30 degrees Celsius. If you're fermenting at a lower temperature, for example 26, 27 degrees, you're just going to take a little bit longer to ferment. So you could be going up to 40 hours, something like that. Higher, if you're incubating at 32 degrees, obviously you bring the time down, so you might be incubating 26 hours, 28 hours. So it isn't an exact science, but there's a lot of variables. So just think, the cooler the temperature, the longer you're going to have to incubate your tempeh for. Regarding the heat, the temperature, if you go too hot, if you go over 32 degrees, it will really hurt your tempeh. You might end up with a bad batch. I try not to go above 31, to be honest, just to give myself a little bit of leeway there. You can spike for an hour or two, but if it gets too hot for too long, your tempeh will probably be ruined, unfortunately. So try and keep those temperatures under 32. If in doubt, go a little bit lower, and that's a safer way of doing it. Now, you can use sometimes you might have a little warm place in your house. In the winter, you'll have the heating on, there might be an airing cupboard. But yes, if you've got warm areas, better just have a general warm heat. If you haven't, there's ways we can make sort of improvised incubation chambers with cardboard boxes and a heat source. So I'm going to run through some ideas, and I'm going to start with the most basic, so the most primitive, assuming you don't have anything. You might find you've actually got some things around the house that you can improvise with. A good thing to have, if you have one, would be a thermometer, just because it takes the guesswork out of the temperature of your environment. And the ideal type of thermometer would be a digital thermometer with a sensor. So the sensor can be inside or next to the tempeh, inside a box, and you've got the digital display on the outside, so you don't have to keep looking, disturbing the tempeh. Every time if you look at a box, open an oven, you release the heat. So ideally you can leave the tempeh alone. It's very tempting to keep looking at tempeh, especially the first few times you do it. You want to see how it's getting on, and it's quite exciting. Try not to disturb it too much. Tempeh likes to be left alone and given a bit of peace and quiet. And the temperature will just vary a lot. Sort of, you open it, you're looking. If it's taken a while to get to the necessary heat, you don't want to be losing that heat too often. But as I say, if you have a thermometer, that's great. I use these ones, they're a bit fancy. I've got several sensors, and these are outdoor ones. There's a nice little unit here, so I can keep track of fridge temperatures, incubation temperatures in different areas and such like. Anything with a sensor, say the digital displays, the sensor, you can pick them up pretty cheaply on Amazon, £5. We're in the era of COVID when I'm doing this video, so I have this for fridge testing for my street food business. So I've got a food thermometer for doing my recipes when I'm cooking to check the temperature. But nowadays, you're most likely to see these in restaurants and when you're going anywhere, and you get the the gunshot to the head. Have I got COVID? 50, 70, I don't know, alive. But anyway, yes, you can use, so these thermometers are okay as well. So if you've got one of these, if you have a thermometer, it makes life easier. Going to the most basic, what you're going to need a surface, a platform to put your tempeh on. You want it to breathe. So you want it to breathe underneath and around as much as you can. Easiest thing to use is just a good old cooling rack. As I say, I'm going to start with the most basic ideas first, and then we're going to move up a little bit with some sort of, for those that maybe want to make tempeh more regularly, how you can, without spending much money, get an environment going where you don't have to keep checking on it. So initially, what if you haven't got anything? If you haven't got a heat source, things around the house that could work as heat sources, things like hot water bottles, electric blankets, you can use a light in the oven, you can use a heat mat, often used in vivariums for keeping reptiles, such like. If you have none of those, and I will go into detail later, a little bit more detail about them. If you've got nothing, you've just got a warm home or a corner or something that's, don't fret. I recently incubated some tempeh a month or so ago. It was quite warm. It was about 24 to 22. It dropped to about 22. So well below the recommended temperature for incubating tempeh, but it was fine. If you haven't got a good heat source, wrap the tempeh in a couple of tea towels. And I would wrap it underneath, put the tempeh on top, and then pop the tea towels, tightly wrap it. You might want to use a couple. And if you've got a temperature of anyway, 23, 24 degrees, that should be okay. I had to incubate it for about 45 hours because it was so cool, but it did work. I didn't think it did. I did it as an experiment to see how low I could take the temperature and still getting a nice piece of tempeh coming out, and it was fine. It's not the best tempeh I've ever made, but it was acceptable. Better than most of the tempeh I see on the internet, without being mean. But yeah, so you can, if you've just got a warm corner, wrap it in a tea towel, and after about an idea, just to let you know with the tempeh process, the incubation, initially when you put the tempeh, when you incubate it, it will be slightly warm because the beans will still be a little bit warm, and you can see the details in the other video I've got about making tempeh. You don't want the beans too hot. If you are using a non-heat source, ensure the beans haven't gone cold. You do want them to be a little bit warm because that's where the initial heat is going to come from. It's going to come from the beans in the bag. And then you're going to wrap the tea towel around it. I'd use a couple so it just keeps that heat source in there a little bit better. After about 12 to 14 hours with tempeh, what happens, it starts to generate its own heat. As the fermentation really starts, tempeh generates its own heat. So when you are using a tea towel, you can probably release it after about 15 hours and open the tea towel, and it will just incubate away there. As long as you've got a room temperature of 24 degrees or so, that would be okay. Now this is not an ideal thing to do, but it will work if you don't have anything else. Now, moving up a little bit, for a heat source, I'm going to give you some ideas with generating heat. Now, as I said, tempeh starts getting hot after about 12, 14 hours, and whatever heat source you're using, you probably want to release a bit more of that heat, lower the temperature a little bit, of which I'll go into a bit more detail. So, one thing we can use, I've got my girlfriend's hot water bottle with its nice little jumper on. This provides a source of heat. Now, if you've just got a hot water bottle under here, it's going to produce a bit too much heat. And as I said, too much heat will ruin tempeh. So what we want to do, we want to just limit that heat, cool it down a bit. So we want something that's going to insulate a little bit more than this woolly jumper, and it will also stop the water cooling down so quickly. So what I've tried out, if you want to wrap it, you can use foil, you can use cardboard. You can even use our nice eco-friendly mailing bags that we use for our mailing kit, our tempeh kits. We don't use plastic, and these are very good for the environment. Cardboard and paper is an excellent insulator, which is why, unfortunately, you see homeless people using it. When I'm on my stall in winter, and sometimes the temperatures in the morning, it can be -3, -4 degrees. We always lay cardboard down on the surface of the street. We are a proper street food outfit, not one of these street food places inside. And then we set up our kitchen every morning. And cardboard is a wonderful insulator. So that will provide a little bit more insulation. Now, the experiment I did with this a few weeks ago, I used one of my accounts boxes. You get these everywhere. You may have some at home, a bit for filing, for invoices, for accounts. Again, it's thick cardboard, lots of layers of paper, and acts like a great insulator. So if you've got your hot water bottle, you can pop these in there, and this will keep the heat, it will keep it warmer for longer, and it will stop it giving out too much heat too soon. So that, pop your little cooling rack on top, pop your tempeh on top of there, and what you'll find with this setup, with your hot water bottle insulated in the box, tempeh on top, what you need to keep the heat in, if you've just got it like this, it's going to get cool and you're going to get the ambient heat of the tempeh. So, little delivery box that I had there. Not sure if this was from Amazon. It probably held a spoon or something, a pair of socks. But yeah, you've got your tempeh on here, hot water bottle, pop your box on top. You've got a improvised incubation chamber there, and that will make decent tempeh. Now, what you want to do, every 4 hours, you want to refill the hot water bottle. And say, so fill it up when you put the tempeh in there. Then you want to maybe fill it up again after 4 hours, again after 8 hours. At that point, as I said, after about the 12-hour point, tempeh starts to generate its own heat. You put more hot water on about 12, it might start getting too hot. So I would then 4 hours, 8 hours, be 14 hours, 20 hours, and then 28 hours, you're refilling it again. So it will start getting hotter and hotter throughout the fermentation process. So every 4 hours, then every 6 hours, after about 20. When you do the last fill at 28 hours, the tempeh will be hot. Maybe you don't want to fill the hot water bottle completely. So yeah, after that point, you don't want to overheat the tempeh. I've done it exactly like that with this exact setup, and I got really good tempeh from it. It was excellent. As I say, it does help if you have a thermometer of kind. So if you do have a thermometer with a sensor, you can just check it. If the temperature goes above 32, 31.5, just release a bit of heat. Just keep the box off for a bit, just bring that temperature down. And obviously if the temperature drops to below sort of 25, 24, you might want to top up the hot water bottle again. If you don't have a thermometer, don't fret, just do as I suggested, and I think you'll find you'll get decent tempeh there. If you don't have a hot water bottle, what other heat sources do we have? Now you could use an electric blanket. I don't have one, but my mum does, who's getting quite old now. These do work. I've tried it. I've tried my tempeh with an electric blanket. If you find you do have one, that works great. You want it underneath, you want it surrounding it, because otherwise you want the heat all the way round. Have your box, you want your tempeh on the top there. So you want it surrounded like that. You don't need too many layers. On the lowest setting, so on setting 1, make sure you've got it underneath. I've tried it without wrapping it and it wasn't warm enough. So just a nice little fold, lowest setting, and you can leave it and it's good to go for 34 hours and you'll have good tempeh. Again, if you have a thermometer, you can check every 6 hours or so. If you've got one with a sensor, that's great. Maybe just if it gets too hot, you can turn the blanket off. All these are approximate. It depends on how thick your boxes are. If you've got this single ply, if you've got the double ply boxes, the insulation is better. If you've got a warmer house environment, obviously it's going to get hotter. So these are just indications and ideas, but they are things that I've tried and have worked for me. Another idea, what if you don't have a cooling rack? You may think, I'm doing my tempeh, it's soaking overnight, I'm making it tomorrow, I don't have a cooling rack, I don't have time to buy one. I've tried now, this isn't ideal, but it's something I have done. Get my shoe box here. I use this with electric blanket. I've got a hot water bottle, and you can use, I've done this, if you haven't got anything, a cheese grater, your bag of soya beans that will become tempeh on top, heat source, maybe near a radiator, hot water bottle, electric blanket or the like, that will make tempeh. It wasn't great, but it was okay. It gets a bit lumpy and weird looking. You're not getting the smoothest block, but it does work, and I have done that myself. So again, that's something you can use. Now moving to slightly better things, if you have one of these at home, they're great, and it's a heat mat. They cost about £10–12 on the internet, not very much. They're usually used, or they're sold typically for vivariums. They look like this. I bought one off them. So they're basically bits of plastic. We've got some elements there which heat up. You can just simply pop them under your cooling rack. What's great, they are temperature controlled, so you can, when you've plugged it in, you can set it to maximum. I did it on a medium, right in the middle, and I was getting a consistent with the box on top to keep the heat in. This is a single ply box, just some delivery that I have for my business. So you pop that, put your tempeh on top, you've got your heat mat underneath, box on there, and I got a 27 to 28 degrees initially. Now bear in mind, and that was on the mid temperature. Now, if you're gonna, after 12–14 hours, remember the tempeh will start generating its own heat. So at that point, it's gonna probably start getting too hot. So what you probably wanna do is reduce the heat a little bit after 12–14 hours, maybe just a touch, and then again, maybe after 20 hours. After 20 hours, you might be able to just leave it as it is, as long as your house isn't too cold. Obviously, you do it in a cold environment, all these times and numbers need to go up a bit. But that works really well. If you've got a thermometer, this mat for £10, a thermometer for maybe £4, for £14, you've got a foolproof setup there. A cardboard box, a cooling rack, a mat, and a £4 thermometer with a sensor. You don't have to worry about anything. You can adjust, if you go in, check it every few hours. If it's getting a bit too hot, reduce the heat. You know, you're basically set. So it's limited layout. So if you do intend to make tempeh more than once, quite regularly, I would suggest investing in one of these and a thermometer. You may have one already. I would say this is the best homemade way of making tempeh, though all the others will do. Another possibility is doing it in the oven. When you put tempeh in the oven, you can just use the light. Obviously it depends on your oven, and you can put the light. Now the light will generate enough heat in which you can incubate tempeh. Now when you're putting the tempeh in there, the beans are slightly warm. It's going to make it a bit hotter, and on my oven, the light, it brings it a bit too much. You want about 36 degrees. So what I do, I get it a little bit warmer, put the tempeh in, and then I just open the oven door slightly, some folded up piece of paper, just to create a little buffer between on the seal of the oven, so the door is open by about 1 centimetre. It just lets enough heat out to maintain a nice tempeh incubation temperature. The reason I know how the temperature is because I've got a sensor in there with a thermometer. I'd suggest using the other method really only if you have a thermometer. By all means, give it a go if you want. If you just want to have a guess, I would suggest opening the oven slightly, and after about 14 hours, open it a little bit more again. Again, after 20 hours, maybe make that crack on the oven door bigger still, because ovens are very insulated. So the tempeh, as it generates its own heat, will make that environment quite hot. So you just need to enable that heat to be released, and then you should make good tempeh. I did tempeh in the oven, it came out perfectly, really good. But that was with a thermometer, keeping an eye on how to gauge the heat. Closing the oven door more if it's getting too cold, and opening it to release more heat. But the oven will make good tempeh, but do keep an eye on that temperature. But once you get to know your oven, if you try it once and it works, you've got a foolproof method there. I'll show you another method, which is what I use for my home facility. I'll take the camera around and show you. I've got a little room, a tiny little chamber about this big, perfect incubation chamber. I've got some shelving racks, and I have an oil radiator. They can work out well. They often have a little temperature thing on the side, little gauge there. I do have a fancy bit of equipment. It's not fancy, but it would work perfectly for any electricity-based heating method. So for the heat mat, and also if you're going to use an oil radiator. When I first started making tempeh from home, this is what I used before I moved into my commercial facility. And But it's just basically when the temperature hits a certain level, the power shuts off. So it has a socket, you plug in your device, whether it's a heat mat or an oil radiator or another heater, you plug it in, you set it for 31 degrees. When it hits 31 degrees, the electricity shuts off, your power source shuts off, and then when it goes below a certain level, 28 degrees, the power comes on again. It's brilliant, and you can literally set that and go and not look at your tempeh again for 30 hours. I was doing that for years back in the day, and I still have them now. When I make tempeh at home, that's what I use, and I'll quickly just show you what that looks like. This is my little home, the shelves that I use. If you want to up your tempeh making environment a little bit better there, and this is the temperature shut off that I was mentioning. So when it reaches 31 degrees, this little device there shuts off the power to my heat source, which is this oil radiator. A few fans there, and it's in these shelves. It's very basic home setup, but it works very well. Hopefully this gives you some ideas. I say they're just ideas, but it hopefully gives you an indication of what you need to do, what the tempeh incubation process kind of looks like, you know, regarding the heat, regarding the temperature increasing. Hopefully give you a few foundations of which to build on. But again, you'll have to tailor it to your own environment, your own home, whether you live in a house, is it a cool house. If you live in a warm place and you like the temperature high, you'll be fine with a cooling rack and a block of tempeh in a warm corner, and that'll be good for you for 30 hours. So you may not need to do any of these methods. There are other things online, by all means. There's lots of ideas out there, so have a look around. And if you are making tempeh, don't forget to check out my video on how to make tempeh, or a few little tips in there. I do unfortunately see a lot of tempeh on the internet that doesn't look very good, and there's a lot of reasons for that, which I won't go into now. But yeah, that video really just goes through the steps to ensure when you're at the incubation stage, you've done all you can to ensure that your tempeh is going to be great. And so yeah, you can check out that it'll be on my YouTube channel, which I'm going to have a few videos and recipes as and when I pop them up. And as well, you can check out my website at thetempehman.com, and we've got more info on there, and you can also buy tempeh kits. So I hope this is useful. And for any of you guys that have bought a tempeh kit off me, do remember you can contact me anytime. I'm happy to give hands-on advice. I will be setting up a frequently asked questions page, so you can probably find that on my website. But feel free to contact me, give me an email, and I'll get back to you if you've got any questions, any issues with your tempeh. I'm more than happy to help and assist as and when I can. So good luck with your tempeh, guys.